Okay guys, I wanted to do a quick video on, let's see here, InterNic, which was the original domain registrar back in the day before we had web host providers such as GoDaddy or Ionos, which is what I've used for a very long time. It used to be called 1&1. Anyways, nowadays you can set up your name server information and modify your DNS zone file through this nice little GUI interface, which is nice. And it goes through and it shows all of the different types of line entries that you can modify. And now it has both the IP version 4 and the IP version 6 addresses to show both locations, I guess both addressing schemes. And you can see here, this is your MX record 1, or the first one and the second one, even though it's 00 and 1, but it's mail server 1 and mail server 2, even though it's 00 and 01. And then also it's showing basically some other different types of files that you would use, like, so for in other words, your A record would show that you have an FTP server and it is pointing at this location, but based on the port, I think 23, it would get to ftp.bdn.cc, right? And then same thing, this would still go to ftp.bdn.cc through IP version 6, right? And then www would go to bdn.cc via that IP address. And then same thing, www.bdn.cc would go to the IP version 6 address. And before it was way more difficult to update this information because there's a couple different steps that you had to go about. Whereas this one right here, this one you can edit your zone file for the various different types of records, so on and so forth. And you can change stuff like your time to live, which is pretty much all you can do with most of these zone files. I don't want to give you too much control, but you can add other I guess you could say DNS modifications within here by adding specific types of records. So for instance, if I was hosting a SharePoint server or really any kind of forward-facing server that anybody could get to from the internet, you would have to define it, what it is, what type of server it is, and then obviously the port that it would be talking to. And then, of course, it would point to the same IP address. Now, if you were to do subdomains and stuff like that off of your original domain name, then you would modify your A record to be able to do that. So if I click on that, it shows my A record right here. Okay, and it says do not edit DNS record for www. Okay, but if I was to create a website and I had a subdomain, so for instance, if I had still had my IT company, I could have www.helpdesk.bdn.cc, and then once again, it would point to this record, this location right here, and then based on how I set up my CNAME stuff, which is right here, I would be able to modify it to point to the various subdomain, right? So I would be able to do this, helpdesk.bdn.cc, and I hit save, and then anything that would come in, it would point to that and redirect it like it's supposed to. Let's see. All right. Okay, so back in the old days, back when we had horse and buggies, we had to do this via a Unix server, and we would have to modify our zone file locally, and then we would do a push to InterNic, and InterNic would then register it within ICANN, because ICANN is, ICANN is where all the top-level domain name servers are located. They're the ones that manage them, monitor them, protect them, secure them, all that kind of stuff. And like before, InterNic was the only registrar, and so everybody had to modify their zone files, push it to them, and then they would then push it out to the actual top-level domain servers. And so I'm going to go ahead and shut up and let you listen to this and kind of see how he's doing it. Okay, so real quick, I'm just going to kind of discuss this real quick. Okay, so the serial number up here is your start of authority, your SOA. Okay, and the reason why you want to tick this up one is that on the top level domain servers that are hosted by ICANN, it'll show that that record is number one. And so when you go and you upload it to number two, it knows that it needs to overwrite number one with number two, so that way this file replaces number one, because number one wouldn't have this information in here. Okay, and another thing too, these are just comments. Okay, so that way you kind of know where you're putting things. This does not do anything on the domain server. The only thing it looks at is the in and the name server that goes there. And then right here it shows name server 1, this guy right here, in, which is the A record, which gives you this information. And then in name server 2. So you have name server 2, and then it's the in A record, and it points to this other address. So that way it knows what two name servers to point to be able to pull example.com information from as far as the top level domain servers are concerned. Okay. And then right here it's showing your MX record, right? And so because there's no specified name server for that, it's basically just a server that's out on the internet. You have in, and that's an MX record. And then 10 is basically it's the highest level. So in other words, you can have multiple mail servers. So you would use a different number. I believe it would be 9. And then the name of your mail server is mail dot whatever your domain name is .com, and you put the dot at the end to make sure it is a fully qualified domain name. And then same thing down here. So you're defining a host name to an IP entries. Okay. And so because you just added the mail server, you're going in, and it's going to be an A record that's hosted on these name servers, and then it's 209.160.52.24 is what points to your mail server. And ironically enough, your web server is hosted through the same A record, which is the same exact web server. It's just that because this is using www or port 80, it knows that 25 is a different port, so that way whenever calls are made for mail on your mail server listens to port 25, unless it's IMAP or something like that. And then with your www, same thing. Your web server, it knows that port 80, and your browser knows to answer to port 80, which is hosted through the web server. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Hopefully that helps.